Hi everybody, Greg Akagi with you as we take a look back at the last couple of weeks on the NAFB Broadcasters and Friends journey to China. What a journey it has been. And it's all been presented by the good folks at Kansas Corn, as well as sponsored by the Kansas Soybean Commission and Kansas Farm Bureau. Greg Krissek, CEO of Kansas Corn, has joined us throughout this time frame. And Greg, as we look back, what a trip it has been. And by the way, I haven't had a chance to explain, we were actually, as broadcasters, a little late. It's called having some issues getting your J2 visa, which you need to get into China. We actually didn't get it until the very last minute, so we did not get a chance to go to Shanghai, but we joined everyone else in Beijing after you guys flew over, and then we flew over just a couple of days later.
Yep, our arrival was a little smoother than yours, and we got a chance to be in Shanghai. And as we talk about, the entire trip here and the many cities that we were in and what we saw in ag operations and ag processing operations, we saw quite a bit. And beginning in Shanghai with an opportunity to see an aquaculture operation that is using a soy meal pellet that has been developed with the USEC, U.S. Soybean Export Council work was real positive. And then just to start to begin to see, for me at least, the massive population that's here, that is being urbanized and is moving into better diets, a lifestyle that includes cars and vehicles, which provides opportunities for ethanol exports. So really a modern society when I relate it to what we have in the United States.
I've heard, and you probably have too, from several of the participants going, this has changed my whole outlook of what I thought about China and the way things were run, but to see it firsthand definitely changed some minds.
I think so. For me, kind of trying to crystallize it together, I would put it this way. I expected to see more of a centrally planned communist economy in mainland China. And that's there behind the scenes, and it's helping, I think, with their infrastructure when it relates to rail and airports and roads and things like that. But what struck me was, while that may be underneath it all, there is very much a capitalistic economy going on here, and a booming economy in China, which is leading again to the urbanization and the growing middle and upper middle class who are going to have discretionary income for better diets and better vehicles, things like that.
I think a couple of examples of that for me was of the fact that we saw an incredible amount of cars that were on the road. At the same time, an incredible amount of electric scooters, bicycles, maybe, or just small scooters in this case, carrying all sorts of things, three-wheeled vehicles, you name it. It was on the roads in China.
It was. There was plenty of traffic to fight through. Pretty happy that we had bus drivers helping us do that, and us not having to fight it. And again, realistically, of the cities that we visited, at least 4 of them that are bigger than New York City when it comes to population. It's my estimation, from what we were told, that over the next 10 to 15 years, basically the same population that's in the United States is being moved from the China rural areas into the urban areas, where they will no longer be farming and they will become part of this thriving economy.
That's 320 million people. Think about it that way. Their middle class is probably bigger than our U.S. population as well.
That's right. It's, again, 1.3 billion, I think, is the best estimate today, and the belief that it'll grow to 1.5 billion. We did learn that they have changed their social policy around what had been for a long time a one-child policy, and it's now 2 children. If you start to run the numbers there, and it starts to happen in families in China, that population is going to grow again, needing with a population needing to eat and being very interested in protein-based diets.
We heard the stats about, we were told, one official said 60% of the water they can't drink. Actually, we were discussing that at one of our last dinners. They had heard actually it was 80% and not 60%.
So when the agricultural policy, which seems to be towards consolidating farmland into bigger farms, I was totally shocked by the fact that I think it's nearly 80% of the population lives in the eastern third of the country. So it'd be like in the United States saying 80% of our population lives east of the Mississippi River. And so that area is crowded. The water quality and environmentalists is challenging. And I guess I didn't realize that they really don't have more arable land to bring into production. So they're going to have to be more productive with their land. And ultimately, I think they have to look towards importing food supplies, which will give us an opportunity.
And when you realize, too, that China as a whole, country-wise, is almost as big as the United States. Greg Krissek is joining us. He is the CEO of Kansas Corn. As we're looking back on our trip over here to China here in the last 2 weeks or so, food supply, 1.3, close to 1.4 billion people. So important knowing that they have to produce that food, yet knowing they don't have enough land to really feed their own people.
That's right. And I think we're going to see their diets change in part because of food supply, in part because of a growing middle to upper middle class that can afford more expensive food. We had an opportunity to go through the traditional wet market type grocery store, which today we believe at least 50% of the food is purchased through those. Very interesting concept. And then the same day see a very high-end grocery store where you could see discretionary income on imports from all over the world, all sorts of fruits, vegetables, and proteins, including U.S. beef and pork.
Wet market was rather interesting, to say the least.
It was. I had heard about them before. There are, I think, more health regulations on wet markets today than there were. Live animals are not slaughtered at the wet market, but the rest of the animal is certainly there, and you can buy pretty much anything you wanted to from any type of animal at a wet market.
As we look at trade, because obviously that's been a big topic of discussion, and by the way, as we record this, the July 6th decision, whatever it may be, we have not reached that as of yet, so that's something we can incorporate into the conversation. But it's a topic that's out there. It's a topic that is not going to go away anytime soon.
That's right. And here, towards the end of the trip, we had several visits with agribusiness processors and then the cooperators that work on behalf of U.S. farmers and ranchers in bringing our product to this market. And it was very consistent messaging, both from Chinese representatives as well as our representatives here in China, how these tariffs on the ag products are going to make us uncompetitive with the rest of the world, and that, again, because China is looking for that food supply, they will buy from anywhere they can, anywhere they need to, and they can. We visited a wharf and loading facility in Dongguan, had an excellent talk with the manager who had been in the U.S. a couple years ago for our export exchange through the U.S. Grains Council. He said, they serve customers, they don't actually take ownership of grain. But he said, distillers' grains had stopped several years ago. He just does not see his customers being able to work through the tariff issues on the U.S. products, which will make them uncompetitive.
Joel Haggard with U.S. Meat Export Federation gave a stat that with the current situation as it is, China is importing beef from England and France, which they hadn't done in 20 years.
He showed us the long list of where imports do come from on pork and beef, and that it's clear that China is going to approve these other suppliers because they will not have access or competitively have access to some of our bigger supplies, and they need to assure themselves that they have access to what they need. Including
the building of the new Silk Road coming in to where Russia, Kazakhstan, and others could have a better access to this market too.
It's clear to me from this trip that China is not afraid to build the infrastructure that they need, that they want to have to go throughout the world. And some of it will be that which is based here. I liken it a little bit to what we did in the United States in building our interstate highway system, which is critical to our transportation system. They have done that, especially with their trains and bullet trains and rail infrastructure and their infrastructure at the ports and docks. We were explained about one of the ports as we drove into Hong Kong. Shenzhen 15 years ago didn't exist, and today it's a port. And there are every one of these large cities we're in had a frankly magnificent airport facility that could do cargo and passengers. So the Silken Belt Road is another example of how they're going to try and connect with the world, and that'll be whoever they can come to good agreements with.
You had mentioned that. Just a couple of examples. Guangzhou's airport, they're building a new terminal, and then they're going to have, I think it's 700 miles of construction on a bullet train from, was that Beijing, clear down to Hong Kong or something like that?
That's right. We alternated taking trains and doing a couple flights internally within the country, which were 2.5 hour flights, so 700-800 miles. We were told today that they're going to complete the bullet train from Hong Kong to Beijing, and I think it would be less than 12 hours on a train, which would be very competitive with trying to fly that as well.
Another example of that would be Hong Kong and Macau. Normally for product to get to Macau, a ferry has to go be shipped, and it takes 6 hours. Well, sometime this year, they're going to get that 55 kilometer, bridge that will open up between Hong Kong and Macau, and could provide great opportunities there.
Yes, again, there's trading that happens there. Macau is an interesting place from what I'm told, and really needs to be supplied with all of its food from and through Hong Kong or directly from China. So I think we'll see lots of new opportunities. It just depends on who will be able to supply those. Will be strongly influenced by what the trade agreements are.
You mentioned new opportunities. That's also the underlying part about all this, is that there's great opportunity out there, depending on how, as you just mentioned, those trade agreements go.
I am always excited and very confident in the productivity and ability of the U.S. farmer, and especially in my case the Kansas corn farmer, to produce product. And we do produce more than we need there at home, whether it's in our state, in the Midwest, or even in the United States. Again, 95% of the world population and growing live outside of our borders. This in China has been an excellent example of a very large market that could provide great opportunity, especially for value-added products like beef and pork and ethanol, that would give real good economic returns in our state as well. From where I sit today, we have to have access to those markets.
Greg Krissek is joining us as we have been reviewing the NAFB Broadcasters and Friends trip to China, just getting over with, and what a trip it was, and other things that we did, and lo and behold, who would think the Great Wall, bullet train, seen so many great things, the Terracotta Warriors, the Panda Research. I mean, my gosh, you could check so many things off that list.
Certainly there is a lot to see in China, more than I probably realized. And I think, being part of this trip with the farm broadcasters and some of the management of the farm media system, I think, and I hope you found it too, Greg, that those individuals experienced this opportunity that they are going to try and relay back to farmers throughout the Midwest and throughout the United States. I think that was a good learning experience, and it's been a while since the NAFB farm broadcasters have done a trip like this. I hope they found it valuable, and I know I did.
Also, by the way, in China and in Hong Kong, it's hot and humid in really gigantic capital letters.
Actually, it's funny, Greg. I just had a friend in DC on Facebook say how bad it was at 64% humidity in DC. Well, I was able to write her back immediately and say, well, here in Hong Kong today, it was over 80% humidity. And when you went out and walking around, you found out really fast how humid it is. So we're kind of looking forward to actually maybe some Kansas humidity when we get back.
We'll take hot and humid in Kansas versus hot and humid in Hong Kong.
This was the most humid place I have ever been.
You've got my vote there as well. So, well, Greg, first off, thank you for allowing me to be a part of this trip, and I had a wonderful time. Memorable experience.
Well, we're really glad we could share it. I'm really appreciative of the Kansas Corn Commission and their support of our participation in this, and look forward that maybe in the future there'll be another opportunity to do something similar.
That's Greg Krissek, CEO of Kansas Corn, and we hope you enjoyed the video updates we've been able to provide into China and just some of the thoughts that we had throughout the trip. Our reports have been presented by Kansas Corn, as well as the Kansas Soybean Commission and Kansas Farm Bureau. For Greg Krissek, I'm Greg Akagi. Thank you for joining us.